Welcome back, Caddy Corner, episode 81. I'm Austin.
And I'm Caleb.
And we are back again.
Welcome.
81 times. Good job, us.
Yeah.
That'll work.
Yeah.
So this episode is all about organizing and coming up with ideas. Sounds generic, but it's actually, I feel like people don't think about this a lot.
Yeah.
You have ideas all the time, and how many of them do you remember? And if your answer to that question is not that many, then this is the podcast for you. So yeah, we're just going to run through some points, podcast style, like we normally do every week. Speaking of that, every Friday, audio, video, this show, Caddy Corner main show, informative, knowledge bombs. This exact same format that we do every week. We just talk about what we know about, sort of, and spread information. So that's what we do. Caddy Corner after hours every Wednesday. Talk about whatever we want to talk about for as long as we want to talk about it. And it's audio only. I think that is all of the prefacing stuff. Rate and review the show, like, comment, and subscribe. Caleb, take it away.
All right. Coming up with ideas. It's not a very easy thing to do, especially for me anyway.
Especially when you're on the spot, too.
Yeah. This is definitely something that I struggle with. So take my notes with a grain of salt.
Boom.
But basically just going to start it out with how I kind of find ideas and my brainstorming process and the places that I go for those kind of things. The very first place that I usually start whenever I'm trying to come up with an idea is podcast. Because for those of you who don't know, I make one of those.
These are 2 points.
Every week.
For 81 weeks.
For the last 81 weeks,
Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
And so I take a ton of inspiration from other self-improvement podcasts, and because I listen to a lot of them, and if I see one if I listen to one and I'm like, yeah, that's good stuff, then maybe I take their idea or I take the way that they formatted that episode or just things like that, just take an inspiration from the podcast that I listen to and put it into the podcast that I make.
Totally. And I think that is like the most obvious way of coming up with ideas is effectively what that is it's trading something for like the idea. Like there's a cost exchange. In that case, it's like time. So you're sacrificing however long the podcast that you're listening to is for hopefully an idea. And I always think about it that way because I one time saw this TikTok and it was Mark Cuban talking about like why people should like read books. And he's like, if I can pay $25 for one idea, like that's a dub. One like really good idea.
Yeah.
Like that's a dub. And I agree with that totally. You know
Definitely.
what I mean?
Yeah.
The trouble is guaranteeing that. So, there's because you could listen to a 2-hour podcast and it'd be nothing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Get anything from
exactly,
it, yeah.
Totally. And there are other kind of versions of that. Like for myself, something that really works well is like working outside of like my normal work type of environment. So generally speaking, that means like going to like a coffee shop and working from there on whatever that it is that I'm working on at the time. But effectively then what I'm doing is I'm paying for however much it costs to have a coffee, but hopefully coming out of that with ideas. Yeah. And I do that a lot, and that's super effective for me. So yeah, it's super important. That's a super good way of doing it as well. For me, coming up with ideas, a lot of that starts with just general like brainstorming. I am a mind map guy. I'm a draw it out guy. I have the worst like drawing skills that there are, I promise. But that's what I always do. I always go to just like just complete brain dumps and then figure out what's good later. We'll talk about that more in the organization section of this. But I do that a lot. I try and do that like a couple times a week. Just completely dump all of the ideas that I have out of my head. How many of those convert into good ideas? Maybe like 2.
Yeah.
Seriously. But that's something that I really do try and do a lot. It's just like I like mind maps. I like lists. And that's kind of what I do. Yeah. That's what this comes in handy for. So
yeah, definitely. The next place that I usually go for ideas is YouTube.
Yeah.
And so YouTube is a weird place for me, because sometimes I'm just there chilling, just putting on whatever I think is interesting.
Theo Von clips in the background.
Yeah.
I understand.
And sometimes I go with the intention of finding something, so maybe whether that's an answer or maybe like I just made a video and I went to go shoot a prom and I've never done that before. So I went to YouTube to look up prom recap videos to see if there was anything there that I could find and use just so I could get a little bit of an idea of what I wanted to make for this prom video, because I never made one before.
Totally.
So that's kind of the things that I use YouTube for. Sometimes it's just entertainment, and sometimes it's very like work based.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Totally.
Like I'm trying to get something done, and so I need your help, people.
Yes.
But whenever I'm there for entertainment, this is where it gets kind of weird. Is I'm always watching with I wouldn't even say the intention of like pulling something away from it.
It's just who we are.
But it just happens.
Yeah.
Every time. And so that's why like whenever people are like, YouTube is the greatest entertainment app of all time. And I'm like, sure. But not for me, really.
Yeah, totally.
because I can turn on a video for fully entertainment purposes and then get so much more out of it, like creative wise,
Totally.
than entertainment wise every time.
Yeah.
It feels like.
I'm totally the same way with that. Yeah, and I do that a ton too. I do that all the time. And one of the things that I try and do with exactly that, like watching YouTube videos and pulling inspiration and ideas from that, because it's so easy for us to do, because that is exactly the medium that we exist in. We're not trying to make movies, right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to make whatever, anything, like the video, our style of making videos is making YouTube videos. It's because that's what we've consumed the most of.
Yeah.
So what I try and do all the time is watching YouTube videos and consuming them with the intent of pulling the information away from them. I save YouTube videos to my like watch later that I want to watch with that kind of intention.
Yeah.
Where I'm like sitting at my desk with my headphones on, turned up really loud. That way I can hear all the SFX and all the weird stuff going on in the background. I've got my iPad in front of me and I'm writing down what I like or what I don't like or questions that I have or whatever. And I try and do that fairly regularly. Just because I pull so much inspiration from YouTube videos.
Yeah.
So much. It's insane. So yeah, I do that all the time. So often.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Crazy talk.
It is.
Yeah, but I think it's insane how much information and ideas you can actually pull though from like consuming things. And you don't think about it that way, because I think the reason why is because you want to think that your ideas are like uniquely yours. But bro, it's so hard to have an idea that is uniquely yours.
Oh,
It's almost impossible.
I would honestly say that every single idea that I've ever had has been not my own.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Like everything that I do definitely is out of inspiration of something else. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I think that there's some degree of like just what we do in that. Like if I like how somebody edits their video, then I'm going to copy some stuff and I'm going to implement it into my own. And what you end up doing in our case is you end up becoming a conglomeration of whatever you like. Do you know what I mean? But it's so important, and that's how it kind of is for every thing. Like if you're, it doesn't matter what kind of job you work. Like you can pull ideas of how to do things better just from your peers or from other people, depending on like how much access you have to like consuming content of whatever your field is and like the actual world. Like if I was thinking like if you work in a hospital, like you shouldn't watch Grey's Anatomy to get like ideas of what it's like to work in a hospital. You know what I mean?
Right.
Maybe there's some truth to it. I can't say I know, but I don't have no idea, to be honest. But maybe there is. But you can just learn so much from your peers just by talking. That's actually my next point is collaboration for ideas. Yeah, that's so important too.
So important.
Like, it's insane. What I have written down is that whenever like collaborating on ideas, it helps you refine half-baked ideas. That's what I always call them. Yeah, it's just ideas that are like a little soft. You don't know what they are. Yeah. You have an idea, but you haven't got past that. And everybody has kind of had those things where maybe you have an idea to do something, whether it's like for a class or for whatever, and then you start and then it just completely sucks immediately. I think that's what happens whenever it's a half-baked idea. You just don't know really what you're trying to do or how to get there, and it's because you didn't refine it at all. And the easiest way to refine it is to talk to people who are going to tell you the truth. Like, don't talk to people who are going to just be like, oh, it's really good. You don't want that at all. You never want that. Because then they're going to tell you that you're like not fully thought out idea is really good. Next thing you know, you're like rented all this camera equipment and you're going to shoot your movie and it's just brutal. You know what I mean? That'll happen. Totally will happen. So I think collaboration is so important because other people know a lot of stuff. We talked about this in last week's podcast. But it's super important to just talk to people, especially other, like in the creative space, it's so easy to do that because everybody has a different perspective on how things should look. So having those conversations is super helpful, I think. So helpful.
Yeah, 100%. So this next point here is where my list gets a little controversial.
All right.
I use it. Some people hate it. Some people love it. It's called AI.
Oh, okay. Got it. Let's go.
Yeah,
sure.
ChatGPT helps me come up with a ton of ideas.
Yeah, completely.
A ton. Because, whenever so like what I make most of the time is this podcast here, and so what I'll do is I will say to ChatGPT, I am going to make a podcast, a self-improvement podcast. What are some topics that I can choose from to like talk about? And then it'll give me a list of like 10,
Sure.
And say I go through them and I'm like,
right.
And then I
hit it with the make it 25.
Yeah, and then I'd be like, give me some more and make it more specific.
Right.
Because we've been doing this for 81 weeks.
Yeah, it's
so
tough.
pretty much every broad topic we've talked about.
Yeah. These are good
So I'm
points.
like, make a more specific idea list, and then it'll give me some, and then I'd be like, give me some more that are kind of like this one, and then that's how I can like get a really solid list, and then really dig in and be like, okay, this is what we should like make a podcast about
Totally.
this week. You know,
AI is so good at that. It's
It is.
insane how good it is at that.
It's the best at that.
Yes.
Because that is the way, and I might be the only one who thinks this, but I know that I'm not. But that is the way that I want Google to work.
Totally. That's what I've always said about ChatGPT is it's Google that you can talk to like it's your friend.
Exactly.
And it just works in that way.
Yeah. I mean, because you think about whenever you go to Google and you want an answer, and sometimes it just doesn't give you the answer. But
most of the time.
Yeah. I feel like most of the time it takes a lot of work to get the answer that you want from Google, unless you're like asking it how old is like your favorite celebrity,
Totally.
or whatever, But yeah, because you can't just go to Google and be like podcast ideas. It'll give you the 10 most basic ideas because those are the website links that people click on,
Totally.
The most.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason why I use it. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good for that.
Yeah.
It has its use cases, you know what I mean? And you have to be able to, like, not using it is just a dumb thing to do. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I guess I don't know, like, what other people's perspectives can be on AI, but I do think that not using it because you think it's whatever, cheating, or you think it's, like, that's just the wrong way to think about it. You just can't think about it that way. But it's so good at producing ideas, and you can get specific. I mean, exactly like you said. Like, you can filter out what you don't like. You can tell it to do this, do that, and it just saves you the time. Like, imagine how long it would take for you to come up with 25 podcast ideas that aren't what we've talked about already. Think about how difficult that is.
Right.
Like, that's insane. It's insanely difficult. So AI is such a good tool for that. It's like really crazy how good it exists in tons of different ways too, because you have ChatGPT, which is really good for like what we do. Obviously it just gives you text, but it's effectively what we're doing every week is we are creating text. We always come with notes, and then we're just digitizing it by speaking it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's like what ChatGPT does. But if you're like an artist, maybe you can use something like Dolly that gives you like a generic, not really generic, it gives you like an kind of a whatever photo sort of thing that you want. So then you have like an inspiration of like, I don't know how art works, but you have inspiration in a different kind of way. Like where text-based doesn't really work for you, maybe images works better for you, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important to do that. I'm now in the organizing section of my notes. Do you have more? One more?
Yeah, just one more. And it's kind of like, it's kind of like a better bridge anyway. Yeah, my next point, whenever you're trying to find ideas, is just don't stop like thinking about ideas. It's something that subconsciously happens. Anytime you're driving down the road, anytime you're like sitting at your desk, watching TV, anything, you're always like, your brain is making connections,
Totally.
whenever you're not thinking about it. And so whenever you think about life that way, and you think about, I can get an idea from anything that happens in my day-to-day life, then that's whenever I think that you can start making like really great ideas. Just because it's like your brain is doing it already. But if you're not thinking about it, then those are just going to waste,
Completely.
And so you always have to be aware that your brain's going to be making ideas, all the time. But you got to be making sure that you're supervising up there. And so whenever something good comes across, you can be like, whoa, what was that?
I mean, what a transition point that is. That is an insane transition point that you just had. That's crazy how good that was. I mean, we do this, though.
Right.
We do this, though. This is the hardest part, I think, is organizing your ideas.
Yeah.
And for me, it's become easy, right?
Right.
And I think that the reason for that is just because, like, we've done this podcast 81 times. I've been making videos since I was, 16. So ideas has always been kind of a process. And I'm not saying that I was good at it whenever I was 16. Like, it's probably been, 8 months that I've been, actually good at it. I have one big point, and that is notes. My kind of sub point of it is called functional notes, and we'll kind of get there. But for me, you got to write it down. I mean, it's what we do.
Right.
I got to write it down. Archiving my notes, I go digital just because it's easier. I can look at my notes on my Mac. I can look at it on my iPad. I can look at it on my phone. We both use GoodNotes because we do Apple Pencil notes, and it's just better. It's way easier to organize than Apple Notes or it's just my favorite of the note-taking apps. I guess I haven't tried them all, but it's better than Apple Notes for sure. Apple Notes gets really messy. It's probably one of the worst ways to organize your ideas if you have a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
But whenever I'm coming up with ideas and writing them out, whenever I'm brain dumping, I usually go pen and paper, just because I like that. I don't know what it is. I think it's because I just feel very intentional.
Yeah.
Pen and paper. So that's kind of how it is for me. The general note-taking of it for me is brain dump. Creating ideas is physical, pen and paper, and then the archiving of those ideas is digital. Whether that's Google, on Google Docs, whenever I'm really writing out things, or GoodNotes, writing stuff down. Anyway, anything that I can use multi-platform. So
yeah. I mean, you have got to write it down because it is impossible to remember.
Completely.
Like I said already, your brain is always making connections, by itself. And you don't have to control that at all, But what you do have to control is the brain to hand to mouth connections that help you remember what your idea was, Because you can be thinking of something sick, super sick, maybe the best idea ever of all time,
a home run idea,
and then you're like, oh, that was such a good idea that I'm definitely gonna remember that,
and you never will.
And so you're like, I'm not gonna write it down because I'm gonna remember that. 24 hours later,
you might remember 20% of it.
Yeah, and then you're like, wait,
right?
What was I thinking then?
Completely.
That was incredible.
Completely.
But if you wrote it down, then that wouldn't happen. If you have an idea that's you think it's even a little bit useful,
write it down.
Just write it down. It's so much easier to just write it down and then scratch it off the list later because you didn't like it than it is to just try and remember
from scratch
from nothing.
Good luck.
Yeah, you're bound to forget.
Exactly. And what that's like the feeling, because we've both been there.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure we've both been there. But what that's like, the way that I always think about that feeling is it's like walking into the kitchen and forgetting why you're there.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like to me. You sit down at your desk and you're like, home run idea. Here we go. And you just freeze.
Yeah.
And you're like, what am I doing in this place currently? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why are my headphones on? You just don't even know where you are. That's how it feels whenever you just completely forget your ideas. For me, the best way to do it with that, because for me, those home run ideas, they come when I'm doing something. So, and a lot of time that is either watching videos or editing videos. So I call it functional notes, but I'm sure that there are different ways of thinking about it. But basically what that means, at least in the context that I'm using it, is notes that are specifically tailored to whatever kind of situation that you're in. So whenever I'm at my desk, I am very prone to, I have my sticky notes. Those sticky notes are left on the chin of my monitor so that way they're forever there and they're looking at me. And those are my ideas or whatever it is that I have. Generally it is things that I want to add to an edit of a video or what I saw on TikTok that I want to eat for dinner and stuff like that. And the reason why I do that in that kind of context is because it's super easy for me to reference. All I have to do is look down. There's my notes right there, sticky note. I don't have to open any books. I don't have to open any apps. I don't have to wait for anything to load. There it is. I think that that's super helpful. Maybe like checklists are helpful for you. So that's something that I think Apple Notes is really good at. That little check button.
Yeah.
That's so good. So good. So if that's something that you do, like that would be a functional note as well. If you're somebody who goes to the grocery store with the checklist in their notes, that's what I do. That is kind of another version of functional notes. And I think that that is super helpful because it helps you archive your ideas whenever you're working through something. That is literally how I edit videos. I go like pass to pass, write down what I need to continue doing, check it off. If I have an idea, write it down, monitor, boom, functional notes. So important.
Yeah.
It literally saves me because how do you remember stuff?
Right.
You know? And I think about that a lot from like a video editing perspective. I don't know how people don't edit that way.
Yeah.
Like, do you have that? Do you write stuff down?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Have to.
I think so too. I don't know how you wouldn't, because there's so much to think about, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm even the same way, like whenever I am like writing papers like for class, usually I would use my iPad and I would just have it like sitting looking at me with like all these kinds of different information and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just because it's a little bit easier than it is using it on a Mac. But I mean, I don't know how people get through. And I also think like I am very like scatterbrained. Like,
Oh yeah.
I am in and out quick.
Yeah, me too.
Like whenever you have one of those home run ideas, at least for me, dude, it could be gonzo in seconds.
I know.
It's insane. Which that's the write it down, aspect. And that's another thing too. If you're like that, because that's what I've noticed for me, and it's one of the reasons why I keep everything out all the time, is like if I have one of those home run ideas, it could be gone in an instant. But if I can just grab a sticky and write it down really quick and put it on my screen, then I did it. I caught it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's something that's important to consider too. Like if you're somebody who can remember your ideas for like longer than 15 seconds or whatever, then you don't need to worry about that as much. But if you're somebody who, like in my case, can totally forget super fast, set yourself up for success, I guess, because it's tough. It's really tough out there.
Yeah, definitely.
That's all I got.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, Caddy Corner episode 81, ladies and gentlemen.
Boom.
Hopefully, you got something from this. I think it's important. And the thing is too is like this. Obviously, this seems like an episode that's like really tailored towards like creators or whatever, but it also exists for students as well. Like if you have an idea for what your history presentation should look like, or if you come up with what you think your final project for your whatever class should look like, but then you forget, then you're in the same position that we're in whenever we make this podcast every week or whenever we edit videos or whatever. So everybody needs ideas, the point, so it doesn't just affect creators. Even you guys that like math out there, you still probably have ideas. So check out Caddy Corner After Hours on Wednesday, which is today. So it's in the past. I don't know why I said it like that, but it's audio only. We'll be recording that in just a second. If you enjoyed this show, check out every other show that we've ever made, except for episode 1. You will see a show very similar to this, where we talk about information and knowledge bombs. And every Friday, audio and video is that show for the past 81 weeks, which is insane. I'm Austin. He's Caleb. We'll see you all next week. Peace.